the next portion.
Wonderful. Professor Sharma is here. He's a hardworking USF type, teaching a class, running right here to be with us. Hello, Barbara. I'm going to have Professor Sharma sit there on the right, and you sit on the left. Take a glass of water. Relax. It's right behind you. Before I give the mic over to Sharma, I want to tell you, before you were born, there was a professor at Berkeley, rather notorious, by the name of Chalmers Johnson. He finally wrote his great masterpiece in academic circles, and he wrote 3 scathing other books. The masterpiece was MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, the Japanese economic miracle. And he coined a phrase that led most of us who worked in Asia to understand that in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, there was a theoretical device that would be helpful. It was called the Capitalist Developmental Strategy. And this meant that states could, in fact, not follow the American model, the Anglo-American model, and could have as actors at the center of their economies their governments. And if they were smart and worked together, there was an amazing event, an eruption of activities in the financial area. And it seemed to work, at least in those 3 cases. And so you point out some of the reasons for China having to worry a little bit, because it might mean some bumps in the roads, and those bumps might mean that the regime goes away. But I'm going to leave that for your friend to talk to you about. I want you to have a mic. I want it to be held up very close so we can hear in the back of the room.
Well, as Pat said, I came in a bit late, so I did not hear the whole of Greg's presentation. I think I caught the last 10 minutes of it, but I'll repeat the whole thing again. I came in late because I had a class, so by the time I came from Lone Mountain, I was able to only hear about 10 minutes of Greg's presentation, but I did have the great pleasure of reading his book, glancing through it, because Pat gave me a copy yesterday. So I took time and I looked at it, and what a delightful book. And as I was looking at this book, and looking at your really seminal work on the Chinese car industry and on China, 3 questions, or 2 important questions come to my mind. And then we'll open it up, because I like to see what other folks think and have questions. Number 1 is that in Asia, there are now a number of countries that are in the business of producing cars. Malaysia, as you know, has been producing cars for a number of years, the famous Proton. And it's a pretty good car. I mean, the Proton is built with Japanese technology, but it is of relatively good quality. And then, of all surprises, India, that has had a car industry for the longest time, now has a fairly modern car industry. The famous Nano, which is for $2,000, it is supposed to be the car for the local people. It has met, I would say, certain world standards. And the Indians are seriously thinking of exporting it abroad. And I think they would get not a large, but a decent market share. Question number 1, and you may have already mentioned this in your presentation, is are the Chinese at that level? Have they been able to export? And is this local central relationship a hindrance? Because it creates a problem of quality control. If you have local level functionaries and local governments doing it for the purposes of meeting local demands, then what about the export? That's question 1. And my larger question has to do with what's happening to the Chinese car industry now. As you know, after the global financial crisis, the Chinese economy was not hit as hard as some of the other economies. But the Chinese do recognize that the day of export-led growth is over. They understand that because of shrinking demand, declining aggregate demand in advanced economies, as we begin to deleverage. So, and of course, the Chinese have attempted to rebalance the economy towards domestic demand. So, what implications does it have for the Chinese car industry, which is not producing, just like producing textiles? This allows for a certain degree of capital technology transfer. So, it's a big investment. So those would be my two general questions that I would ask you.
Okay. Well, to start with, exports is a really important question, and it's something I didn't really have time to touch on. So this is a real key. If you look back at Japan and Korea, those are two countries that are well known now for making high quality cars. Even the Hyundai, which we used to laugh at back in the 80s, I remember when they first came. Well, let's be honest, it was a lousy car. The Hyundai is a high quality car now. And there's a reason that Japan and Korea make such good cars. Both of these countries in their formative stages, when they were, Japan, this sort of began in the 50s, and then in Korea it began in the 60s under Park Chung-hee. They began these industrial push programs to push their auto companies. And one of the things they pushed them to do was to very quickly bring their level of quality up where they could export, but not just anywhere. North America and Western Europe. That's where the governments wanted their automakers to export. So did they just tell their state-owned automakers where to export? No, because they weren't state-owned. The automakers in Japan and Korea were private from the beginning. In Japan started a company called Isuzu. The government started a company called Isuzu before World War II. It didn't last very long as a state-owned company. It was privatized within about 2 years. And in the 1960s, Korea also tried the state-owned route. And within 3 years, they privatized their one state-owned auto company. Both countries quickly figured out that the private sector could do this better, and so the government got out. Now, that's not to say the government didn't take a really huge role, and this is what Chalmers Johnson was talking about, the developmental state. The governments of Japan and Korea took a very big role. They didn't have complete autonomy in that regard, though. They couldn't tell the automakers everything to do. For example, the government of Japan, MITI, the industrial planner in Japan, did not want this little company called Honda that made motorcycles to start making cars. Well, obviously, that didn't work because Honda is now making cars, lots of them. So they didn't have complete autonomy to order the companies to do everything they wanted. But what they did, what Japan and Korea both did, was various different measures of using a combination of carrots and sticks to push their automakers to lift quality and to begin exporting into the developed world. So that was a real key to both of those. China has been exporting a lot of cars, but they've only been exporting to the developing world, to Africa, to the Middle East, to Latin America, to Russia. There are no Chinese cars being exported to the United States or to Western Europe. A company called Great Wall is exporting some cars to Australia. Chery is exporting a few cars to Australia. Unfortunately, they both just got caught shipping cars containing asbestos to Australia, and that has kind of set back China's auto industry globally now because people are concerned. What are you putting in these cars that we don't know about? This is kind of unfortunate. Corners get cut. Who knows where that decision got made to start putting the asbestos in the car, but somewhere along the way, someone thought they could get away with it. So these sorts of lessons are things that are having to be learned. So the export issue is one important issue, I think. Geely, another private company, has tried very hard to export cars to the U.S., hasn't been able to. BYD has also tried. They're having difficulty getting their cars up to the standards of emissions and safety that they have to reach in order to be sold here. Plus, they've also got to overcome the brand image, that they lack. So that's another issue. So that's on exports. I think why you're not seeing Chinese exports to the developed world is the quality simply is not there. And I'm not sure, I don't remember when you came in, but the market share of Chinese cars, Chinese branded cars in China is still only 30% among passenger cars. So 70% of the passenger cars in China are still foreign branded cars. And so overwhelmingly, the Chinese haven't even been able to tap their own markets completely. So, no question, that's part of it. But part of it is also simply just pragmatism. They believe, the Chinese consumers believe overwhelmingly that foreign cars are of higher quality. But yes, I mean, a Chinese person who is getting ready to buy his first car, depending on how much money he has, would rather buy maybe a smaller foreign branded car than a larger Chinese branded car that costs the same, because he or she would view the foreign branded car as of higher quality. So there's a quality issue in there, and there's part of that is also simply due to the fact that you've got the state-owned enterprises are all partners with the big foreign automakers. And so again, as the leader of an SOE in China, you don't want to invest a lot of money in research and development, because that's taking a big risk that you could end up losing, and even if it pays off, it only helps the next guy. So they have a very short-term investment horizon. But also the partnerships with those foreign cars, or with the foreign automakers, is sort of a double-edged sword. It's so easy to just sit back and take the technology of your foreign partner and build foreign cars, which are already the best sellers in China. So they're looking for the path to the easiest money. The best way for an SOE to be profitable in the auto business is just to simply make foreign cars. So there's just less incentive to want to invest in your own brands. Now, they all do invest in their own brands, because Beijing has been hammering for a couple of decades now, we want to see Chinese branded cars. So they do have them, but their hearts aren't in it. The private companies, on the other hand, their hearts are 100% in Chinese brands, because that's all they can do. They don't get to partner with the foreign automakers. So there's sort of that addiction to the foreign technology of the Chinese automakers that sort of keep them from moving their innovation as far as they should. So the second question was, I'm sorry. In 2009, or actually toward the end of 2008, when it became apparent that this global financial crisis was becoming something more than just a temporary downturn. As you know, in the U.S., Barack Obama, can you hear me? I think the battery might be fading in this. Okay. The Obama administration made a big stimulus effort, spent $700, $800 billion on stimulus. The Chinese also stimulated, and they actually got their stimulus going faster than anyone else. Their stimulus was huge, and for the auto industry, it went into subsidies for autos. Consumers who bought autos of 1.6 liters displacement and smaller, these are small cars, would get a subsidy, and that just really made auto sales take off in China. That was the year that China first surpassed the United States in total automobile sales. And it was largely due to that stimulus. In fact, the first graph that I showed, you saw China's sales sort of doing this, and in 2009 they did that. And same in 2010. The stimulus was in place for those 2 years. And as long as the stimulus was in place, they sold a lot of small cars. Now, that was cleverly designed because that space of 1.6 liters engine displacement and below was largely occupied by Chinese brands at the time that was announced. 85% of that segment was Chinese brands. But the foreign automakers were pretty quick to react. They started bringing in their cars, their small cars as well, to try to take advantage of that. But that's one thing that really shot car sales up. They withdrew that stimulus, however, at the end of 2010. 2011, Chinese automobile sales only grew about 2.5% overall. So they had been growing. They grew 48%. This is just insane. Auto sales grew 48% year over year from 2008 to 2009. Then they grew another 32% in 2010. They withdrew the stimulus. Sales only grew about 2.5% in 2011. And in fact, in 2011, that's when Chinese brands for the first time in well over a decade, actually lost market share to the foreign brands once that stimulus was withdrawn. So the Chinese have shown themselves capable of stimulating activity. But what that tends to do is affect the consumer psychically. They tend to become addicted to these sorts of programs. China also had a cash for clunkers as well that got a lot of older cars off the road and incentivized people to buy new cars. And that they withdrew that. And so just like in the United States, what these stimulus measures do is they really boost sales, but in many ways they only create a hole in future sales. So people who were thinking of buying 2-3 years down the road, oh, there's a stimulus, I'll buy now. Well, so those sales don't occur in the future. So they pull a lot of sales forward is what they end up doing. So there's definitely this desire to see China's economy more oriented toward consumer spending. The deeper reason underlying why China's having difficulty getting there is the financial sector is not set up to support it. Interest rates are still not market determined. Essentially, it's financial repression. So people who save are not being rewarded for saving. But they continue to save in high numbers because they're concerned about the future. And so that concern about the future, the concern about maybe health care or old age pension and these sorts of things make people save a lot. But at the same time, they don't get any kind of a return for that as well.
you drive a car in China? Did you own a car in China? You're from the far north. So tell the audience, don't be shy, and speak into the microphone, and they want to hear from you. This is the future basketball star of the West you're looking at. Go ahead.
No comprende.
Can you hear it now? Maybe you just can't hear. You like that sound, right? Speak as if you're going to swallow the mic. He'll like it.
I don't have a car in China, and I don't know how to drive. I don't have a driver lesson either.
What is the town you come from? Explain us. Farther north, it's not Harbin.
I'm come from Qingdao, like northeast part of China.
Where they make the beer.
Yeah, the best beer in China.
Best beer in Asia. Right? Best beer in Asia?
The best beer in Asia, yeah.
You'll never get a job with the government unless you follow my instructions. The best this and the best that. Now we turn, of course, to our friends in the audience who always have questions. Oh, the hands went right up. I knew it. I knew it. Here's a new friend of mine I just met over here. Don't worry. You want more to talk? Oy vey. All right. We give you one more chance to be a star off the basketball court.
Okay, I want to thank you first to share those information and knowledge. And I have one question about if Chinese economics collapse in next 2 years, maybe 1 year, what will happen to the Chinese auto industry and the global auto industry? Thank you.
Did you get the question?
Yes.
Directly into the mic, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, I don't believe the Chinese economy will collapse in the next 1 or 2 years. In fact, I sense that with a new leadership coming in China, that pragmatic voices will probably begin to institute some reforms. This is my own prediction and maybe even hope, I would say, that they will begin to institute some of the reforms necessary to rebalance the economy away from such dependence on investment and exports and more on the consumer model. Now that said, they don't need more cars, certainly not in Beijing. They don't need more cars really in Shanghai. They don't need more cars in Guangzhou. A lot of Chinese cities are putting in limits on cars. Either, in some cases, it's the number of cars that are allowed to be sold, so they just put a limit. And let's see, last year Beijing started putting in a limit of 250,000 cars to be sold during a year. The year before, over 700,000 cars were sold in Beijing. There is now, if you want to buy a car in Beijing, you have to enter a lottery, and you have about a 1 in 100 chance of winning the lottery to buy a car. So it's tough to buy a car in Beijing. Now people, they're buying cars outside of the region and driving them in, but they tend to be limited on when and where they can drive if they don't have a Beijing license plate. And this is another thing Beijing has had in place for a while is on certain number of days, you simply cannot drive your car based on the final number on your license plate. A lot of cities are starting to put these in place. Even Guiyang, the capital city of Guizhou province, China's poorest province, has begun to limit the number of cars that can be sold and driven there. So this is a trend that is happening. And it's happening because local government leaders are looking pragmatically at the situation, even though they love the fact that, yes, a local auto company contributes to economic growth, it contributes to social stability because it employs people. At the same time, they realize our citizens are upset about pollution and congestion. And so there is this realization coming that we can't simply just let everybody drive a car. Now that's kind of unfair from the perspective of younger Chinese who have all their lives wanted to buy a car, and you finally reach the point you can buy one. You've got the money, and the government says, no, you can't. So this is going to require some new models of thinking about urbanization, about how cities should work. And this sort of thing is starting to happen all over, not just in China. This sort of rethinking needs to happen in the United States as well. The notion that the only goal that's worth working for is GDP growth is being seriously questioned. Has been by people for a while, but increasingly so. It's more about human well-being than it is about just pumping more money into the economy. And so these ideas are going to limit future growth of China's auto industry. Ideally, these ideas would limit every auto industry in the world. Now, some of my clients wouldn't like me to say that, but I try to be honest with them and tell them the truth that you've got to change the way you're doing things. And so the vehicles of the future, I believe, and there are some innovators in China who are working on this. In fact, I can show you a picture, not that. This is on the streets of Beijing. This little car, this is made in Shandong. There are a lot of little entrepreneurs in Shandong that make these little electric cars. Now, they tend to run off of just a series of lead acid batteries hooked together, so they're not very sophisticated. They're not lithium-ion batteries, but these kinds of things, from the side it looks like it's fat. It's actually quite skinny. There's a seat for the adult in front and then two small children in the back, so it's actually kind of narrow. But now, this is not what people aspire to drive. But these other things, these sorts of cars this is developed by General Motors. Same concept as the, what do you call the thing? Segway. The Segway, yes. And this is MIT's offering here. So these sorts of things are being thought about in the world. To the degree the automakers can be pushed into this, and it's going to take more than simply raising the CAFE standards to 54 miles per gallon. That's not the way to go. But I'll leave it there.